We've looked at this speech from the throne, and Conservatives cannot support it. It is another speech that is full of Liberal buzzwords and grand gestures with very little to no follow-up plan. It doesn't speak at all of national unity. It doesn't speak of our energy sector and our workers in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba. It doesn't talk about agriculture. It leaves behind the Canadians who are suffering, single parents, people who have mortgages to pay, people who have lost their jobs, small businesses that are suffering and continue to have to close their doors. It doesn't address in a real substantial way issues around testing and getting that testing quickly reviewed. We are very, very displeased with this speech from the throne. We are very concerned that there's no fiscal framework. The only thing Canadians can be guaranteed of fiscally is that there will be more debt. And the Prime Minister still seems to think that when the government goes into debt, that's not the people going into debt. And the Prime Minister needs to know that when the government racks up debt, that is the people who are going to have to pay it. One thing he did talk about in the speech from the throne is the promise to raise taxes. At a time like this, that is the last thing that Canadians need. So we're happy to take your questions, and I will ask my colleague to also come and speak in French. But we are not happy with the speech. We believe that it is not what Canadians need. Every other G7 country has a plan to deal with the pandemic. We still do not have a real plan. And the plan, the pandemic is possibly going to be, there'll be a second wave. And we needed to see this government deal with the health challenges, deal with the disunity in this country, help those who are being left behind, help those who need someone who will consider their challenges. You know, it's interesting to see a lot of what the Liberals do is the Ottawa knows best. The Ottawa elite will tell Canadians and will tell provinces how to manage childcare, how to manage healthcare. That's not acceptable. The provinces asked for funding. The provinces asked for money. And instead, what did the Prime Minister do? He ignored that request and he said, we'll come in and we'll try to do your job for you. And that doesn't work, and that's not what Conservatives believe is best. Thank you.
The speech said that this was no time for austerity. With so many Canadians struggling through this crisis, how do you respond to that message?
Well, I think it's typical of the Liberals. I mean, every speech from the throne has been promises of massive spending and tax increases. This is no different. Our belief is that when times are good, the government should have been responsible and should have been managing the finances of the country in a responsible way. And then when times are difficult, as they are right now, the government would be spending to support Canadians and to get our economy going again. The only thing that we've seen from this speech from the throne is that this was the way for Trudeau to cover up his scandals. It was a way for him to shut down the committees. And now he's promising, again, grand gestures, interfering in provincial jurisdiction, not supporting the provinces when they've asked for some support, and raising taxes on Canadians. And I think it said in the speech, he mentioned government will go into debt. He repeated that line again, that government will go into debt so that Canadians don't have to. This seems to be the same type of thinking that budgets balance themselves. The people of Canada are going into deeper deficit. $343 billion. That's the people of Canada. That's our children and our grandchildren. And it's very disturbing to see the Prime Minister and the Liberals don't recognize that. That's concerning. If they had come out and said, we recognize that this has to be paid and that we will support Canadians, but there also has to be some fiscal stability. They're still talking about budgets balance themselves. And it's very, very concerning, not just for Conservatives, but for Canadians and for those who are being left behind by all of this.
I understand it hasn't been decided yet whether or not Mr. O'Toole will be speaking himself tonight after the Prime Minister addresses the nation. What's holding up that decision?
Well, as you're aware, he has COVID. And so there are some very serious considerations. Obviously, he won't be able to speak live. But my understanding is, as we speak, there's some discussions going on and some options that are being looked at.
Mackenzie?
Hi, Mackenzie Gray with CTV News. Your party has now said that you're not going to support the throne speech. Bloc Québécois leader Yves Yves-François Blanchet has tweeted essentially saying that his party doesn't look like he'll support the throne speech as well. Are you ready for an election if the NDP doesn't support the throne speech?
Well, Conservatives are ready for an election if that's where this goes. I think the Prime Minister had an opportunity to present a real plan to Canadians, and he didn't do that. It's very disappointing to see what he's done in the middle of a pandemic, proroguing Parliament, stopping committees, stopping parliamentarians from doing their work, all with the excuse that he was actually going to present something to Canadians to deal with this pandemic and the ongoing effects of it. And instead, it's just grand gestures and empty promises and wading into jurisdiction that he has no business wading into. So, but of course, Conservatives, we're ready. We don't believe that Canadians are wanting to go to the polls, but if there's an election, we'll be ready for it.
So you're not concerned about Canadians not wanting to go to the polls? I mean,
well,
if we is this not a game of chicken, though, between the parties about what's going to happen?
This is a democracy. This is a democracy. And so in a democracy, when the government presents a speech from the throne that we can't support, that's we have to put the best interests of Canadians top of mind. And so we can't support this. Canadians are looking to us to do our job and hold the government accountable.
Canadians to not have an election during a pandemic?
Well, then the Prime Minister should have presented a speech from the throne that addressed the concerns of the opposition, that addressed the concerns of the provinces, that addressed the concerns of everyday Canadians who are struggling, who are left behind, who are worried, who don't read this document and feel any sense of security. That was up to the Prime Minister to decide, and he made his decision.